Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the second episode of my yet unnamed solo podcast endeavour. As you may notice, the sound quality is a bit different. I have a camera recording me today, as opposed to one of the fancy podcast microphones, because I am actually at home today. So, just to explain away any sound quality issues that will inevitably pop up later. Excuse me. Today we will be discussing Alex Garland, a screenwriter and director, a personal favourite of mine, not that I'm biased or anything. Let's begin. Alex Medawar Garland was born in London in 1970 to his mother Carolyn Medawar and Nicholas Garland, who were a psychologist and a political cartoonist, respectively. He went to school at University College School, it's a bit of a weird name for a school, in Hampstead, and earned a degree in art history from the University of Manchester later on in life. In 1996, Alex Garland published his first novel, The Beach. The novel's intelligent storytelling and fascinating themes of excess, community, and utopia was his breakthrough into mainstream recognition. He was only 26 when he wrote the book, while backpacking through the Philippines, although the story was set in Thailand. As one of the most highly acclaimed novels of Generation X, The Beach received enough attention to warrant a film adaptation by Danny Boyle in 2000. Unfortunately, audiences felt that this film was underwhelming and didn't live up to the original novel. Danny Boyle, however, was now interested in the novelist, and in 2000, Garland wrote the script for Boyle's next movie, 28 Days Later, which was a zombie movie inspired by various mediums, namely Night of the Living Dead, among other 1970s zombie horror films, John Wyndham's Day of the Triffids, and, surprisingly enough, the first Resident Evil. Alex Garland's main jobs are as a screenwriter and director, as well as a novelist in his earlier years from 1996 to 2004, because he only wrote 3 books, though this isn't massively relevant to film. In the film industry, this grants him huge amounts of creative freedom, allowing him to reinforce and explore particular themes and ideas that otherwise could have been lost or just poorly done by any other director. In Ex Machina, for example, Garland played the role of both writer and director for the first time, leading to the film's critical success, and validation of his talent as a storyteller. Since then, Garland has directed every single one of his own scripts, and his films Men and Annihilation went on to become much more successful than some of his other works under other directors. Garland is a fan of the science fiction genre. This can be clearly seen through his films Sunshine, Ex Machina, and Annihilation. According to an interview with Lightspeed magazine, some of his earliest inspirations come from comic books that he read when he was a child. For example, Dread, Metal Hurlant, known as heavy metal in the UK, and Watchmen. He had lots of access to these kinds of things and other artwork because his father, who was a cartoonist, collected this sort of material. Garland was also a fan of lots of sci-fi authors from the same time. These include people like J.G. Ballard, John Wyndham, Ray Bradbury, Robert A. Heinlein, I've not heard of him, I'm afraid, Isaac Asimov, and Arthur C. Clarke, many of the figureheads of the era of original science fiction. Most of Garland's work subtly follow a few core themes. He questions the ethics of social constructs, mental states, artificial intelligence, and the dangers of the mind and human nature. He calls some of his work idea movies, in that they propose a key question or idea for audiences to take with them after the screen goes dark. The best example of an idea movie in Garland's own work would be Ex Machina, the most popular of his original screenplays, where audiences are prompted to question the morals of artificial intelligences and their lives, whether you could even call them alive. Now, like last episode, I would have made a experimental short creation based off the filmmaker I'm studying, which today is Alex Garland. So I would have made a script based off his work and what I've learned off his work. So I'll be putting that around here. Alright, I hope that was good. I hope that went well. Thank you very much, past self. Anyways, on to a bit about Ex Machina, because there's a few things I wanted to talk about. It's quite interesting. Alex Garland's directorial debut and most popular film to date is Ex Machina, a 2014 sci-fi thriller about the dangers of hyper-advanced artificial intelligence to human life. It was filmed over approximately 6 weeks at the Pinewood Studios outside of London and the Juvet Landscape Hotel in Valdalen in Norway. The story follows Caleb, an employee of a tech company selected at random by Nathan, the company's reserved CEO, to spend a short holiday with him at his private home. When Caleb gets there, he finds that Nathan does not live alone, and that he has been spending his time building androids that mimic the appearance and intelligence of other humans. Ava is one of these androids, and the third of our central characters. Ava is the face you would have seen on the front of most of the films, marketing, and the subject of the film. What happens between them is explored in the rest of the film, which I won't be spoiling directly, but I'll be talking briefly about it next. If you haven't watched Ex Machina, feel free to skip ahead to avoid all of this. Returning to what I was saying about Ava, interestingly, she might also be the protagonist, as stated by Garland in a 2015 Reddit AMA, in which he says, quote, "The protagonist is the robot," unquote. I say may because while it might seem obvious that Garland is telling us that Ava is the main character, which makes sense, the English language also allows us to interpret this as the real robot is Caleb, the man we initially thought was the protagonist. And the film asks this too, when he cuts his own arm to find out whether he is an android too, because they've become so advanced it might be impossible to tell otherwise. The film and Garland are praised mainly for their intelligent writing, and the way it uses an audience's expectations, human instincts and emotions to manipulate and shock them, just like Ava does in the film, to prove that this really could happen to anybody. Ex Machina was inspired by, quote, "books by very smart people about AI and human consciousness," unquote, according to Garland in that AMA again. While this is quite unspecific, there is a way to find out what he means by this. During a later scene in the film, Caleb is typing code into a computer to save himself and Ava from Nathan and whatever he's planning for them. To anyone else, this code would be gibberish, but not to Reddit user Infinite Entropy. They ran it through Python 2.7 and it printed out an ISBN code, which is a 13-digit number used to identify books. The outputted code led to a book called Embodiment and the Inner Life, Cognition and Consciousness in the Space of Possible Minds, which is terrifyingly long and super abstract, which is a book by Murray Shanahan, and we can only guess that was an inspiration for the film, considering its inclusion. So to conclude with a summary of what I've learned, researching Alex Garland over this last week has really put into perspective the real power that science fiction holds in creating a narrative. To reference the Lightspeed magazine interview again, Garland says, quote, "Science fiction gives these incredible permissions to talk about whatever you want, and it's not embarrassed about big ideas," unquote. And I believe him. Just looking through his work, it's very clear that his best ideas would be very impossible without CGI or suspension of belief, etc., and a small part of the non-existent is needed for the existence to make sense. But that doesn't mean sci-fi is an easy winner for every writer. The genre provides all the space you need to say whatever you want to say, but some of those spaces are already taken, if that makes sense. To succeed, you need to create something much different than everyone expects, otherwise you've made no real impact or change. The second thing I've noted while learning about Garland's inspirations is that there are so many inspirations, there's just so much to learn from, and that you should be proud of that. While that does contradict what I previously just said about making separate work from everyone else, I think writers, more specifically me, need to find and learn from similar work, really read into what makes them good and why, but most importantly, use that to be something completely else. Inspirations are just inspirations after all, and not guidelines. but you can have as many as you want. Anyways, I hope that all makes sense. It's a bit of a loose concept in my head. That concludes my episode of the podcast for today. I hope that was educational for you, or at the very least intelligible. I wrote a lot for this, and I think it went quite well. So thank you very much for sitting and listening to what I had to say. I appreciate that. And I will see you in the third episode, where I will talk about David Fincher. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good night. Or day, I guess. See ya!